Hi, first graders. Happy Wind Down Wednesday. I'm so glad you're here with us this evening. Find someplace cozy to sit and we will get started. Tonight's read aloud will be the last Wind Down Wednesday that I email your family about. Each Wind Down Wednesday, I email your family to let them know about the Wind Down Wednesday read aloud. Starting next week, I will post the read aloud on my YouTube channel, and you are more than welcome to listen to the videos every Wednesday. I'll continue to post the video on Wednesday evenings, and I hope you continue to listen and enjoy the stories. This evening, we will finish reading our story, Flat Stanley's Worldwide Adventures, the Mount Rushmore Calamity. Today in class, we talked about how there will be some changes starting next week. We are so excited to welcome another teacher, and although it will be a big change, there are so many wonderful things that are staying the same, like you are all part of a wonderful class community, and you created it, and all of you are remaining in the classroom. And another part of your school day that's remaining the same is the way that you know how to show safety, responsibility, and respect. Something else that's staying the same is you will get to visit all of your specialist area teachers, and those teachers play a very important part in your day. I'm looking forward to seeing you in the hallways at school. Kiss your brain for being flexible and remaining open to something new. Before we begin reading our story, I want to thank you so much for my awesome bow that has all of your names on it. I'll be wearing it the next few days. Speaking of clothing or accessories, things that you wear, I'm so excited to tie-dye with you tomorrow. We will all have matching socks. As a reminder, I will bring in all of the tie-dye supplies and the socks for us to tie-dye. I'm looking forward to a special afternoon of tie-dyeing, and you can even wear your tie-dye socks any day, but especially on World Down Syndrome Day, which was March 21st yesterday. Make sure you wear it. Wear them next World Down Syndrome Day too. Let's get started with our story. Chapter 5. On the trail. Oh, remember Gold Rush. The horse is missing. Must have been spooked by the cave-in, Calamity moaned. I'll have to track him before he gets too far. The boys kept a safe distance behind. Calamity didn't seem in any mood for their company. Oh, so she's not happy with them. Now and then they heard her muttering, "Show-offs!" And they dropped back even farther. Oh, so she's doing some name-calling, bucket tipping. Stanley and Arthur felt miserable. They had been show-offs, and they knew it now. After a while, Calamity gave a little whoop and ran into a clearing. There stood Gold Rush, snorting and lathered in sweat. The cowgirl threw her arms around her horse. Let's get you some water, fella, she said. Calamity looked around. We're a ways off from the stream, she worried out loud. And I don't see any signs of a spring, another source of water. I can help. I have an idea, Stanley cried. Calamity shot him a look like this. That said, she'd heard just about enough from him. So she's not really interested in hearing his idea. But Stanley did indeed have an idea. Anyone want to make a prediction, a guess, using the clues about what Stanley's idea is? You could say, my prediction is... He laid down in the grass in front of Gold Rush and curved himself into the shape of a trough. A trough is something that horses eat and drink out of. Pour in some water from the canteens, he directed Calamity. Calamity did, and then Stanley held very still as the horse's big lips came right down and slurped from his belly. It tickled, but Stanley Lambchop did not move, and he did not spill one drop. What's your favorite thing to drink? When Gold Rush had finished drinking, Calamity helped Stanley to his feet. She wore a big grin as she shook his hand. Maybe I was wrong about you, partner, she said. Any friend of my horse is a friend of mine. So you're not angry with us anymore? Asked Arthur. No, I reckon you two aren't half bad for a couple of boys. Now, I better fix us some grub, which is a fancy word for food. We're lost, partners. We're going to have to figure out how we get home from here. A cowboy can't think on an empty stomach. Oh, it's so important to make sure that you eat because eating fuels your body. Calamity Jasper pulled a can of beans and a pot from her saddlebags. She built a fire, and soon the beans were bubbling cheerfully in the pot. Cowboys always carry beans for emergencies, she confided. Arthur made a mental note, which means he remembered in his mind, to carry beans with him from now on. How did you learn to be a cowboy? He asked Calamity. How did you learn to follow tracks like that? We didn't see anything, but you followed right to Gold Rush. Let me try that again. We didn't see anything, but you followed right to Gold Rush. Now, this is Calamity's answer. Following tracks isn't a cowboy skill. I'm part Lakota, Calamity said proudly. We Native Americans know lots of useful things, like which plants make medicine and how to hunt and fish and how to use, whoa, doggy, smoke signals. Hey, that reminds me of when the Delaware Museum of Nature and Science came to visit us, and we learned all about plants and their survival traits. Calamity jumped to her feet. She ordered Arthur to gather a load of tumbleweeds. When he returned, she piled the tumbleweeds onto the campfire. Immediately, a dark, thick smoke streamed upward. What about a blanket? Stanley asked. Don't you need a blanket for smoke signals? So a smoke signal is when you smoke, right? Think about smoke that comes out of a chimney or the smoke that you see when there is a fire. And if you are trying to be rescued because you're lost, using a smoke signal is a way to communicate that you need help. You don't know where you are and you need help getting to where you're trying to be or trying to get home. Calamity grinned about his question about the blanket. That's where you come in, partner. Both boys understood at once. Arthur picked up Stanley's feet and Calamity took both of his arms. Together, they flapped Stanley over the fire, sending puffs of thick smoke into the clear air. There they are. Stanley very bravely held his breath and didn't cough once. Everyone hold your breath for 5 seconds. Before too long, they heard a rustling in the bushes at the edge of the clearing. The tour group! We saw the signals, Calamity's father said. Came to see what you youngsters were up to. So now Calamity's father is here to rescue them. Looks like they're up to a real Wild West time, said George Lambchop. What a trip, eh, boys? So Mr. Lambchop and Calamity Jones's dad are together around the campfire. The children were grateful to follow the tour group back along the trail as they crested Mount Rushmore over Lincoln's face. The boys walked to the edge to take a look. The repair crew had done an excellent job. The crack was barely visible. Remember the crack from the earlier chapter? Stanley stepped out even farther. See, Arthur, he boasted. See, I can too stand out here. But just then a sudden gust of wind caught Stanley by surprise. It swept him off his feet, and he went skittering down Lincoln's steep forehead, coming to rest on the bridge of Lincoln's long nose. Stanley held on for dear life. He looked around far, far above him. He saw Arthur looking terribly worried. And suddenly, he was very glad his brother had brought his authentic cowboy gear with him. Arthur, he cried, throw down your lasso. Put your thumb up if you think Arthur's going to throw down his lasso. Thumb in the middle if you don't think he will. Arthur uncoiled, unraveled his lasso and swung it around and around, aiming. Everyone, swing your lasso. Then he let go. So swing your lasso and let it go. And the rope went sailing out into the South Dakota sky and landed right in front of Stanley's outstretched hand. Calamity Jasper gave Arthur an admiring nod. Mighty fine twirling, buckaroo, she applauded. Mighty fine. Stanley grabbed a hold of the rope and tied it around his waist. Bring me up, Arthur, he called. Just then another gust of wind blew across the mountain. It lifted Stanley Lambchop up like a kite, up and up until the lasso was stretched taut, which means like there's no flexibility in it. Stanley flew high above the tour group. Boys, Mrs. Lambchop called when she saw what was going on. Quit that horsing around. Now, dear, the boys are just having a bit of fun, Mrs. Lambchop said. It's their vacation, too. After all, I don't see the harm. I suppose you're right, George, Mrs. Lambchop said. Still, I noticed Stanley smelled strongly of smoke, and that is not good for a growing boy. I'd like him to come back to camp and change his clothes. Arthur, reel your brother in now, please. When Stanley was back on Earth, Mrs. Lambchop invited Calamity to join them for a cookout. After a delicious meal of hot dogs and hamburgers, Mrs. Lambchop said, I believe this celebration calls for s'mores. Touch your head if you've ever had s'mores. While they were toasting the marshmallows, Stanley and Arthur apologized for causing so much trouble in the mine earlier. Oh, apologizing for mistakes is so important. We practice that in class. I especially love how everyone in our class community knows how to use an I feel statement to let someone know how they're feeling about something. We know no one can read your mind, so it's important that you communicate using an I feel statement and then letting them know what you want. Remember, I feel statements sound like, I feel sad when you, and I want you to stop, or be safe. Or you might say something like, I feel disappointed when you. Can you please give me some space? Also, we're sorry you didn't find any gold, Arthur said. You have nothing to show for all that time in the mine. Well, that ain't exactly so, partner, Calamity said with a grin. She dug into her pocket. What do you think's inside of her pocket? And produced a large gleaming gold nugget. I found it in my boot. Reckon it fell during the cave-in. Real gold, breathed Arthur. Can I hold it? You can do more than hold it, partner, Calamity said with a mysterious smile. You got a hammer? You think he has a hammer? Arthur fetched the hammer they had packed to pound in the tent stakes. Calamity placed the nugget on a flat rock and brought the hammer down hard, cracking it into 3 chunks of gold. She gave one to Stanley and one to Arthur. They're yours. You earned them, she said to the brothers. Way I see it, without the cave-in, I wouldn't have had the gold in the first place. And without you, there wouldn't have been no cave-in. And with that, Calamity Jasper, I think I said Calamity Jones earlier. Even teachers make mistakes. So Calamity Jasper mounted her trusty steed, right, her horse, waved goodbye, and rode off into the sunset. Chapter 7. There's no place like home. The next day was the last of their vacation. Calamity was off at a rodeo, and the lamb chops were enjoying the park as a family. Many interesting activities filled the day, but Mr. and Mrs. Lambchop noticed the boys seemed subdued. It's the lack of fresh vegetables and fruit, George, Mrs. Lambchop fretted back at the campsite that afternoon. I dare say you're right, dear, Mr. Lambchop said. You know the boys so well. So she's noticing a difference in the boys, and she thinks it's because they're not eating many vegetables. And Mr. Lambchop agrees. Just as they were packing up, a park ranger strode into the camp. Why, hello there, Bob, Mrs. Lambchop greeted him, remembering how he felt about his name. Hello, Lambchops all, Ranger Bob said. Sure are sorry to see you folks go. We've had a grand time, Mr. Lambchop told him, worth every penny of our admission fees. That's what I'm here about, said Ranger Bob. Your brave son Stanley paid his fee like everyone else, and given what a hero he is, something doesn't seem right about that. I'm here to refund that fee with the park's gratitude. So Stanley was able to travel for free because he was a hero. The park ranger's here to give them their money back. Excuse me, Stanley interrupted politely, but my brother was a hero too. If it weren't for him being out here, I would never have grabbed onto the face of that rock. I can see how that is, agreed the ranger. 2 heroes, 2 refunds it is. Then Ranger Bob personally affixed the Mount Rushmore State Park sticker to the rear window of the Lambchop's car and wished them a safe trip home. Mrs. Lambchop looked into the car, overstuffed once more. I'm sorry, boys, but no, said Stanley. Arthur can have the space. You can mail me home. I don't mind. So Mrs. Lambchop didn't even say, hey, we don't have enough space. And Stanley is assuming that that's what she means by looking at the overstuffed car, that someone's going to not be able to fit. So Stanley offered to be mailed home, right? Because he's flat. Just like Flat Miss Falvey was mailed home to you. So the Lambchops drove to the nearest post office and slipped their elder son into a large mailing envelope, along with the rest of the graham crackers, a slice of American cheese, and a deck of cards. Insurance? Asked the postmaster, because you can pay for insurance for your mail, which makes sure that it gets to where it needs to go. Mr. Lambchop chuckled, as if the postmaster had made a good joke.
No need. There's no finer postal system in the world. I say, if you can't trust the United States Postal Service to deliver a package safely, then whom can you trust? Mrs. Lambchop asked that the envelope be marked fragile. But Stanley was horrified at that suggestion. The package says, "Do not bend." He did allow the postmaster to stamp "Do not bend," however. And then the 4 Lambchops made their way home from South Dakota, 3 of them in a car and 1 in postal trucks and planes.
During phonics this week, we learned about the different ways to travel today and the ways that people traveled in the past. We learned that another word for the word today is the present.
Stanley arrived home first, refreshed by his restful trip, and helped unpack the car when his weary family appeared. Weary means tired. It's always good to get away, Mr. Lambchop noted with a sigh, but it's always good to get back home, finished his wife. When Stanley and Arthur hurried to their room, to unpack, while their parents tended to the stack of mail that had piled up. Arthur pinned the newspaper article about them on the bulletin board. "Brother Heroes," read the headline above a photo of the boys smiling with their arms around each other. "You know, Stanley," he said, "I don't think I've ever thanked you for what you did, becoming a bridge for me to cross over." "Well, I didn't thank you either for lassoing me when I fell down the mountain," Stanley replied. He unpacked the 2 gold nuggets and placed them on the bookcase. "Brotherhood is more important than gold." "Right," agreed Arthur. "And it's more important than any girl, too. Even a cowgirl." "Right," said Stanley. "Brothers above all." "Boys, there's a postcard here," Mrs. Lambchop's voice interrupted them. "Who do you think the postcard is from?" Tell someone at home. "It's from Calamity Jasper! For me!" Stanley and Arthur each cried at the same time. "It's addressed to Cowpoke Lambchop," their mother called out. "I'll leave it here in the hall." In their haste to see whom it was for, Stanley and Arthur, the brothers above all, nearly trampled each other running out of their room. To see the postcard. It was so much fun reading this story. I know that Flat Stanley is a character that our class community really loves, and I enjoyed reading this book with you. I hope you have a great night, and I will see you next Wind Down Wednesday. Bye.